Chapter 13. I'd certainly brace Gurley good and stiff about this, Pat advised slowly. I doubt whether he's got authority for any such move on his own. If he can show anything in writing with Marble's name on it, there's your proof of conspiracy right there.
Well, if I do anything, I'll bring the law down on Gurley like a ton of bricks,
fumed Moon.
He can count himself lucky if I don't take a gun on him.
Well, it wouldn't do any harm to talk to Sheriff Elmy, Pat agreed. Just put up your horses, we'll eat first, and then we'll go hunt 'em down. But Firm Elmy was not to be found anywhere in town, as they soon discovered. Pat learned the lawman had ridden away late in the afternoon and hadn't reappeared. The evening dragged on, and still he didn't appear. Press Moon was in a fine state, uncertain of what to do.
"It's one hell of a note," he growled in exasperation. "If a man can't expect no protection whatsoever from the law in this country, there sure ain't any now."
They were in the corrando having a drink, and Press glaring at every man who came near him.
"It's plain that LeBlanc is running that bank to suit Doc Marble. Not much question that Elmy's doing a little boot licking too. By God, I won't stand for it. I'll ride back to Apache Cache and go to Mace Schoonover. If he gives the word, the Brush Boys will back me up, and then we'll see if the Plum Bob can take Axehead Canyon or not. If they show up, they'll be smoked out."
Pat glanced at Clay. What the rancher was suggesting meant open range war, and that could only be one ending to that. The biggest outfit, Variability won, and it would be no different now. However courageous the Mormons might prove in defending their neighbor there in the cache, it could only result in their destruction. Clay got it, too. He had a hard time arguing Moon out of his plan, but at last he succeeded, getting Press to agree to remain overnight in town. Sheriff Elmy would be sure to put in an appearance by the morning, the range detective urged. There was a strong hope that he would know how to avert immediate action on Gurley's part. They spent the night in the hotel, and after breakfast the following morning, Pat got up from the table, shaking his pant legs down. "Well," he announced matter-of-factly, "now we'll go hunt up the sheriff." Still sitting over his second cup of coffee, Clay waved a disposing hand. "Go ahead," he told the others. "You don't need me. I'll be along shortly." Pat and Moon sought the street and walked down to the sheriff's office at the rear of the bank building. The place was closed up, and Pat groaned his disappointment, but Pat was only half attentive, persistently wondering in the back of his mind what could be that Clay wanted to do by himself this morning. He would have been no wiser could he have watched the young range detective. Once left to himself, young Marble stirred his coffee a moment or two longer, then got up from the table as if he had forgotten it. In the doorway he paused briefly, settling his hat more firmly on his head while surveying the quiet morning street with swift glances. He stepped out then struck off in the direction of Ed Gurley's office. He never reached it, however. A dozen yards up the street his pace broke. He halted there, his eyes following the ranch rig which came rolling into town. His hat came off at the moment when Esther Moon's turning glance alit upon him. Both were smiling as she guided the horses towards him and hauled in. Clay handed the girl down, tethered the team at the rack, and turned to look at her. Even though her pleasure in meeting him, Esther's uneasiness was plain. "Father didn't come home last night," she said quickly. "I couldn't help worrying just at this time now." "He's all right," Clay assured her. He explained the rancher's purpose in staying in town overnight. "He's probably talking to the sheriff right now. Pat Stevens is there with him." Esther nodded her relief. Her eyes thanked him. "It's just as well I drove in anyway. We need a few more supplies, and I thought with Dad along we could get them from Mr. Starbuck without further trouble." "No need in bothering your dad about that," Clay declared promptly. "I'll go over to the store with you, Esther. There won't be a bit of trouble. Obviously grateful for his aid, she pretended briefly to demur. There must be something you have to do yourself, Clay. You were going somewhere when I saw you. Oh, not at all. He brushed aside the suggestion firmly. I can't be easy in my mind unless I know who you are. Come on, let's go. They stepped into the Emporium, Clay siding the girl with the conscious air of a bodyguard. And as it happened, Starbuck himself was in the grocery department. Well, well, he rumbled heartily, his dancing eyes taking them in and finding them a handsome couple. Well, here's my favorite girlfriend. Howdy, Esther. Clay met his eye levelly. Are we going to have any trouble here? He asked distinctly with a deadpan expression. Jake winked at him. Well, if I was 20 years younger, Marble, you might, he began gaily. Clay turned to Esther with something like disgust. Tell him what you want. Starbuck jumped to procure the items she named, keeping up a running fire of good-humor comment. Esther smiled at him, but Clay's stiffness did not unbend a particle. Well, look, boy, Jake leaned over the counter. My working for your pa don't make me a leper, not with nobody else yet. His tone was chiding. Clay flushed. With Dad gone, no doubt you feel safe enough to serve Miss Moon. It's another $1. Starbuck jumped back as if struck, his cheerful face gone soberly. What's the meaning of that? He got out gruffly. Clay, please. Esther broke in quickly. I'm sure Mr. Starbuck knows nothing about it. She found herself explaining her previous treatment here. Starbuck's shocked eyes lifted to the heavens. Holy murder! He cursed. You too, Esther? I got wind a couple days of something having happened to the cash folks in here. Some crazy order old Doc passed on through Ed Gurley, as I get it from Henson. I stopped it quick, of course, but I aim to get your dad a piece of my mind, Marble, for shaming me like that. His honest indignation over the occurrence could not be questioned. Face resolute, Clay said flatly. That's fine, Starbuck, if you stick to it. I'm a Marble too, remember. Let it happen once more to the Moons and you'll be hearing from me. Meanwhile, Pat and Press Moon had been thoroughly unsuccessful in their efforts to locate Sheriff Elmy, and at length they paused before the hotel. Maybe Clay's located him, Press suggested nervously. Pat's nod was preoccupied. Wait here, Moon, he directed and turned away. Just in case Elmy shows up, I'll have another look around and I'll be back directly. He had his own reasons for leaving the rancher behind, and moving off up street, he made directly for Ed Gurley's office. Much to his surprise, he found the door was closed and locked. Clumping back down the outside steps, Pat was provoked. It did not look at all good to him. What were these men deliberately making themselves scarce this morning for? He crossed the street, was striding up the boardwalk sideway, when eyebrows puckered in profane thought, when a noisy disturbance further along the street made him look up. What he saw froze him in his tracks for a bare second and fetched a grunt past his compressed lips. Sheriff Elmy was standing with several other persons directly in front of Starbuck's store, and even as Pat watched, Press Moon sprang at the lawman, launched himself bodily as if determined to batter him to the ground. Pat saw Clay, Esther, and Starbuck himself, the merchant, grasp Moon by the shoulder and haul him back. Easy, Press, easy, Jake warned the thrashing rancher as Pat hurried up. Such actions ain't going to get you nowhere, nor with Marble either. What's going on? Pat snapped, sweeping their faces with a narrow inquiry. Press Moon subsided, catching a glimpse of him, but his thin face was still choleric. You got to do something about this, Stevens, he burst out with trembling voice. Elmy's putting Clay Marble under arrest, and it's a damn outrage. Pat saw now the manacles that were encircling Clay's wrists. His eye darted at Elmy. Under arrest? His words were clipped. What's the charge, Sheriff?
I'm holding Marble for the murder of Bill Block, Stevens.
The peppy little bantam that he was when aroused, Elmy's taunt voice was as stout as any.
There's no use your arguing now. I'm taking him in.
Pat's lean face was unmoved. Who brought this charge? You didn't think of it all by yourself.
Well, it was Windy Conklin, if you gotta know. There's fresh evidence from a man Conklin swears witnessed the crime, and that's good enough for me.
Where? Pat asked with ominous quiet. Where will this put Ezra? Or haven't you even thought of that?
It'll land him smack in the cell as quick as I can lay hands on him.
Elmy snorted.
I ain't heard nothing that says Marble didn't have an accomplice, and the signs are that he did.
Elmy? Pat began flatly.
All right, now, stand back, all of you,
Ferd commanded grimly.
Marble's going to jail, and I know you don't like it a bit, but everything comes out at the trial, all legal and square.
Without more ado, he led Clay away. Press Moon ranted, and Esther had all she could do to calm him, and even Starbuck put in a word.
I don't know that I blame you, Press, but that was a big mistake climbing Elmy that way. You better get back to your ranch before he starts thinking about it and gets mad.
It was a sensible view, and Pat quietly pressed the acceptance, and a few minutes later watched father and daughter roll away rather hastily in the ranch rig, with Moon's saddle horse trotting along at the tailgate. Once they were gone from sight, he turned back towards Gurley's office, his heels rapping quickly and firmly on the stairs. Again, he found the door fastened, and this time he banged on the panel sharply. Open up, Gurley, he called, or shall I come in my own way? After a delay, feet scraped and the door swung back. The grave-faced business agent looked faintly annoyed.
I'm trying to get some particular work done, Stevens, he said shortly. What is it now?
Pushing in coolly, Pat waited till the man seated himself once more. I expect you know that Clay was just arrested for Block's murder? He opened up conversationally. Gurley's heavy eyes leapt.
No, I didn't,
he rasped harshly, almost angrily. Then his whole manner changed.
My God, Stevens, that's awful. How'd that happen?
Briefly, Pat repeated what Sheriff Elmy had said, and Gurley took it in with abstracted eyes, his bald plate glistening as he shook his head.
That's a damn shame all around. Sorry, Stevens, but in the face of this, I have to let you go.
Let me go? Pat almost laughed. What have you got to do with it? He retorted bluntly. Unmoved, Gurley opened a drawer and counted out some bills and laid them on the table.
Your job was to look after the boy and keep him out of trouble. I'd call it square and drift, he advised smoothly.
So, what would you tell Doc? Pat asked with some curiosity.
Gurley shrugged. Well, this thing speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Gurley, Pat was smiling faintly, at least it wouldn't be news to you that Press Moon was given an ultimatum yesterday. Fork over the steers he was given shares on or get off his ranch. The very softness of his speech bore an edge. Just where do you stand on that? For a fraction of a second, Gurley went rigid. His bland eyes were opaque with opposition.
You're not working for Plum Bob, Stevens. Would you be interested?
Pat's nod was deliberate. Don't ever doubt it, Ed. Some hidden spirit in Gurley appeared to collapse.
I better tell you, it was Windy Conklin again, he returned grumpily. I don't ordinarily take orders from Marble's ramrod, Stevens, but Doc's absence just at this time creates a delicate situation. Conklin insisted on having a clean slate, and Moon is indebted to us for those steers.
He seemed to be struggling for his words now.
I gave Windy the letter he demanded. just to see if it would prod Press into making some restitution. I wouldn't dream of taking definite action, you know that.
That's not the way that Bill Bonney looks at it.
No, and that's all the more reason for going slow,
Gurley insisted quickly.
I tried to tell Conklin that. I'm fully as concerned for Doc now as I am about Clay, and between Windy and the kid, those bullheads may have succeeded in getting them both killed.
Just at present, I'd say Doc is the safest, and I'm still doing my worrying about Clay. Pat's tone resolute. And what about it, Gurley? Can't you force Conklin to withdraw that murder charge? That can't meet with your approval for a minute, and I needn't remind you of what Doc will think about it when he gets loose. Conklin won't be his ramrod any more, and you might try that tune on Windy.
But that's it. Doc ain't loose.
Curly groaned.
Don't you see, Stevens? Plum Bob's worse off than a man with no head. Conklin's beyond my reach. He may even be dealing with Bill Bonney himself, with the kid putting pressure on the father through the son. Only way to prove that, of course, is to watch Conklin's movements in the future.
Pat wondered shrewdly if the agent might be subtly paving the way for events even now impending. Whatever it is, he said quietly, I'll be around to keep watch.
Stevens, we're in the same boat. You can't do a thing,
Gurley insisted, and from his tone he appeared to prefer it that way. No? Pat's brusqueness said that he doubted it. Fort Elmy isn't our last resort by a long shot, if that's your view. What's to prevent one of us from petitioning Governor Wallace to bring in the militia to establish some order around here? Gurley's expression was horrified.
No, no, don't ever do a thing like that, whatever you do. I wouldn't hear of it. It's uncalled for, absolutely.
Well, then what's your proposal? Pat countered thinly.
Well, I ain't decided, but we can't do nothing as drastic as that.
Gurley was dogmatic now.
Probably this whole thing is all of a scheme to the Plum Bob anyway. Marble is fantastically rich, you know that. Dragging the militia, Stevens, and we'll have the added expense of quartering an army for God knows how long, and all for what?
He grew eloquent.
Whatever your ideas might be, I warn you, I wouldn't assume the responsibility of that.
Then you don't think the militia would do any good?
Do good? My, he'd do positive harm.
Gurley shuddered.
Don't go experimenting with human life, Stevens. Bill Bonney will never wait till a gang of soldiers overtake him. He wants money, and as it is, this will almost certainly cost us a hefty gouging, but there's still a chance to save old Doc in the end, and perhaps Clay too.
Pat eyed him thoughtfully and then rose. There was some doubt, from his manner of speaking, whether the man considered money or human life of primary importance. But he passed this over. From the beginning of their talk, Gurley had constantly revealed himself ready to act in a manner diametrically opposed to his own professed sentiments. If not perilously close to treachery, it was fatalism of a particularly unsavory brand. Gurley? Pat asked sourly. Are you walking a chalk line? Gurley went saddle color with the abruptness of it.
What do you mean?
He snapped swiftly. Pat didn't seek to soften the affront in the slightest. He had made up his mind at last, and his measured opinion of this man was far from flattering. Maybe you don't know, and maybe you do, he said thinly. Just don't go so far that you find yourself unable to draw back, because I'll clamp down on you, Gurley, the same as I would a rattling snake. He turned on his heel in the weighty silence, and he strode to the door and left. End of chapter 13.